Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We trust you had a very Merry Christmas. Hopefully you like everything you got, and hopefully you've also heard the first two installments of our year-end awards. They started this past Thursday with our overrated, underrated, most honest political figures, and then on Friday we touched on rising political star, figure fading into oblivion, and the figures we were most sorry to see go in 2023. And now, starting today and for the rest of this week, we'll hand out the rest of our awards. Today's categories are Biggest Lie, Best Political Theater, and Worst Political Theater. So, Jim, what's the biggest lie of 2023?
So, Greg, this is probably going to be my most controversial group of selections in our 6 days of this. I can already hear the disagreements. You may very well disagree. This is, sometimes you have years where, like, an option springs to mind immediately. Sometimes you have to think about it for this one. This one is really almost a theory. Right now, if you looked at the polls, you'd think in a Trump versus Biden matchup, Trump's going to win. Trump's going to win, might win pretty handily. Swing state polls look good for him. National polling, we saw occasionally the poll that has Trump up by 10, immediately followed by people saying, it's not that bad, or that sample looks weird or something. But right now, the polling would indicate that in a rematch, Donald Trump will win and it won't be that close. And you can find a lot of reasons to explain this. People are really not happy with Joe Biden right now. People are really upset about the high cost of everything. You can point to the border. You can point to overseas crises like Russia, Ukraine, and Israel and Hamas and all that stuff. So you're saying, where's the biggest lie? My colleague Andy McCarthy says this is the media pumping up Trump, and that once Trump is the nominee, they will bring out the real polls that show Biden ahead handily. I don't know if it's necessarily that the way it's shaking out. I don't believe that all pollsters are involved in this coherent, coordinated effort to make it appear like Trump is doing better than he is and that Biden is doing worse. But I do note that I feel like we don't hear from Trump directly as often as we did when he was president or when he was running in 2015, 2016. Mostly he stays in Mar-a-Lago. Trump, when he rants on Truth Social, only once in a great while does it break out into the broader news environment. So I think one of the reasons people might be feeling a little more positively towards Trump is they just aren't seeing him as much and they've forgotten all the reasons he got on their nerves. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think Trump is very likely to be the nominee next year. I don't know whether the polling will stay the same. I don't know whether the polling will show Trump ahead by even more, or whether we'll see a Biden comeback. But if there is a big Biden comeback, then the idea that Trump is competitive and all the polling this year, that will qualify as the biggest lie of 2023.
The other thing you have to keep in mind, though, even though that Trump and Biden are completely known quantities at this point, and everybody knows what they think of them, and the majority of people dislike both of them, Trump's going to be going through a lot of trials here, literally legal trials on a number of different issues, from January 6th to Stormy Daniels to classified documents to Fulton County, Georgia. I mean, it's going to be a constant drumbeat of media attention that's going to be extraordinarily negative. And so for the people who didn't like Trump last time but might be a little more inclined towards him this time because Biden's obviously done a horrible job, it'll be interesting to see how much changes with that. But we will see. I'm going to go a little bit bigger picture because every year we have this biggest lie category. I try to think, something specific for that year. But there's one big lie that we got to get out there, and we talk about it a lot, but it grinds my gears, as you know, from every time we bring it up. And that is the green agenda. We can talk about the science behind alleged climate change here, and looks like the temperatures are getting warmer, although I would point out that the UN projections are always way more dire than they turn out to be, and they, of course, always respond by issuing even more dire projections about what the climate's going to do. And there's always, Jim, always 10 years before we're just going to run out of an opportunity, the point of no return. And so we have to take drastic action in that time just to have a chance to save our planet and future generations. But their solutions for dealing with this, supposedly, are extraordinarily threatening to individual liberty on a number of fronts. First of all, John Kerry just this month talking about the need for depopulation. Not exactly sure how he plans to go about achieving that. But first of all, I would argue that in the West, we're not having enough babies. But he seems to think that fewer people on the planet is the key. He's also saying that a huge part of the problem, he and others, is agriculture. Agriculture is a big problem here. So we need to slaughter all the cattle, we need to stop eating meat, and we need to repurpose farmland, which is going to lead to less agriculture, less production of needed staples that we can share across the world in addition to feeding our own people, which will lead to higher prices and fewer people being afford to buy the food that they want. They also, of course, keep saying we need to phase out fossil fuels and do the renewables, but we know at this point the renewables can't even come close to matching the capacity needed. And that's part of the problem with electric vehicles. You've got California and Biden pushing, you got to have 2/3 of electric vehicle sales by 2030 or 2035 need to be electric vehicles. But the electrical vehicle market can't produce the batteries at the number needed to replace the internal combustion engine. So a lot of people just won't have vehicles. And the electricity, of course, to power electric vehicles comes from fossil fuels still. And then you have this guy, Klaus Schwab, who is the head of the World Economic Forum. And he says by 2030, you won't even have private ownership of cars, which I think is the ultimate goal here. Because so when people say, that within 10 years they don't want us to have cars, that's just radical talk there. But here's Klaus Schwab literally saying by 2030, there'll be no private ownership of cars and people are going to like it.
When we meet for the 20th Governance Summit, you will use an app like Uber, but not anymore to call some driver, but automatically guided car, a self-driven car, will come to your hotel or wherever you are and will bring you to the airport. No, Los Angeles is one of the cities with the heaviest traffic, who told me in 2030 Los Angeles will be private car-driven free. And this will allow to transform highways into parks and other public spheres.
I suppose it's appropriate, Jim, that when they tell you can't own a car and you're going to be eating bugs instead of meat, that it should come in the original German. This is a great scheme.
Awfully close, isn't it?
Yes. It's a great scheme to reduce liberty and increase poverty and increase government control, all in the hopes, maybe, of slightly slowing the increase in the temperature.
Well, first of all, let's observe. When you hear the name Klaus Schwab and you hear that accent, you're fairly convinced that was one of the henchmen in Dr. Evil in the Austin Powers movies, right?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Klaus Schwab, and we have ways to make you talk, Mr. Powers.
Yes. The writers of the Bond movies would be laughed off the script for
You're a little heavy-handed with that one.
Yes, it's so obvious. So hopefully people understand what's happening here and just say no, as Nancy Reagan used to say.
I also want to point out that my understanding is that John Kerry, talking about depopulation, there's a distinguished thinker who came up with a very fair proposal to cut carbon emissions in half, as well as poverty, pollutants, and crime. His name is Thanos, and he says that with a snap of his fingers, he can cut these problems in half. I think it's a proposal worth exploring.
Yes. John Kerry, who
He was
started
the Malthusian too,
Yes, exactly. I was wondering if you're going straight from Malthus or even Jonathan Swift there with the modest proposal, but
the babies are delicious, let me tell you. Particularly when they're Irish.
But he's saving the world. I remember that. Remember that one from earlier in the year? You and everyone in this room were together. We're saving the world. It's amazing. No, you're not. You're really not. All right, Jim, moving on from the biggest lie of the year to political theater. Different ways that issues have been presented in public, either for good or for ill. Let's start with the good. What was the best political theater of 2023?
So I'm going to make what I think is going to be a controversial and unpopular choice. But, Greg, I feel like the Republican presidential debates were actually pretty good this year. And admittedly, I did not catch the first one live. I was over in Ukraine when that was happening. And look, did they have bad moments? Sure. Was there too much, crosstalk and yelling and dunking on Ramaswamy? Yeah, even I can have my fill of dunking on Ramaswamy. And if I want to say, I know Hugh Hewitt, I know Megyn Kelly, I think very highly of these people, Dana Perino, but I think they all turned out to be pretty good. I think that they showcased a lot of these candidates at their best. I think that as we had fewer and fewer candidates got more time, and I think you got a better portrait of it. And the problems that we saw are probably more structural. That if you can either ask the same question of every candidate, and when there's like 7 candidates on stage, it gets pretty repetitive. But if you only ask some of them, then the ones who didn't get asked about, say, the border, then start trying to work in what they would have said about the border in their answer about the economy and stuff like that. So I think it's, part of a reflection of that. But I think they were all pretty good. I think that if you went into this not knowing much about Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley, or I think most people knew Chris Christie, but it's fine. Let's say you didn't remember anything about 2016. Ramaswamy, not very well known when this process began. People had no idea who Doug Burgum was. Tim Scott, and I think most people knew Mike Pence, but I think they all got a decent chance to say, this is who I am, this is why I'm running for president, this is what I want to do for the country. And, no debate process would be perfect, but again, I think everybody learned more about the candidates, and we got to see them put their best foot forward. So to everyone involved in running these debates, good job. And I know it's stylish to complain about them, but I think this is good. I think it would have been a lot better if Donald Trump had participated, but, that's his choice. But I think actually, the debates were pretty good and count as, I think, the best and perhaps most illuminating political theater of 2023.
Now, it's clarifying at times, and I think they got better, as they always do, when fewer people are on the stage. But in the beginning, the people barely scraping by to meet the standards, which got tougher and tougher as time went on. They should have that chance to be on stage, to make their case, to introduce themselves to the American people. Doesn't often do that much good for them, but it's good to see the contrast of ideas. And then as time goes on, you get more time with the people with the stronger chance to become the nominee. But as you said, of course, Trump wasn't there. So it's right now people who are in a distant second or third or beyond. And I think having Republicans on the panel, which is obviously easier with Fox News, but even NBC having Hugh Hewitt, as you said, and then Eliana Johnson also with the News Nation debate, being able to frame questions in ways that not only the candidates understand well, but also the Republican voters understand well. So it's not like you have some left-leaning journalist asking a Republican a question, like George Stephanopoulos bringing up contraception out of the blue to Mitt Romney back in 2012 as almost a gotcha moment, as opposed to trying to clarify which one appeals most to the Republican electorate. But I'm going to go south of the equator, actually, and all the way down to Argentina for my choice. And he's been kind of a fun one for us to follow here for the past few weeks, and that's Javier Milei, the new president of Argentina, already taking drastic measures to deal with a very, very serious inflation problem in Argentina. But while he was campaigning, Jimmy brought a chainsaw to the events to talk about how he was going to be cutting government programs, which he did. He already eliminated 12 out of 21 ministries, but going through and explaining what's going to go if you elect me seemed to be pretty effective. This was not the chainsaw. This is him ripping the names of departments off a chalkboard.
Ministerio de Turismo y Deporte, afuera. Ministerio de Cultura, afuera. Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, afuera. Ministerio de las Mujeres y Género y Diversidad, afuera. Ministerio de Obras Públicas, afuera.
And so, Jim, when you have politicians saying, "Oh, I'm gonna get serious about spending," or "I'm gonna tackle this program," or "I'm gonna reform what needs to be reformed," after a while, all that rhetoric kind of blends together. Although he's been pretty unique. But when you actually bring a chainsaw and use that as your approach and promise to take care of out-of-control socialist spending that's been going on for a very long time, that gets people's attention. I don't know if the chainsaw was the critical issue in helping him win a bigger victory than just about anybody expected. I think people just got tired of the leadership they had, but it was a good way to crystallize what he planned to do.
Well, first of all, that's the most effective Spanish lesson in quite a time. Abuela! We know exactly. Yes. Now we know what that means. The other thing is, like, there, I will admit, I'm not usually a fan of pounding the table and histrionics and theatrics and all that stuff. But there is something who said, when a guy gets out the chain, when a guy does something like that, they're more or less committing themselves. When you put, it's almost like a read my lips, no new taxes type moment when you go that out there to say, look at me, this is what I believe in, and this is the one thing I'm going to do, then I think the public says, okay, he really means it, that he's going to try to move heaven and earth to accomplish this, because he knows if he doesn't accomplish this, he's going to have a lot of egg on his face when he runs for re-election. So I can kind of say, okay, all right, if I don't think like this is just the usual strutting for votes and not really thinking through how you're going to do it, once you've gone through and said, I'm going to eliminate all these cabinet departments, you kind of have to go ahead and do it. You don't really have that much of a choice. Or 3, 2, 1. Either you do it or you metaphorically die trying. Because if you don't, everybody's going to remember and you're going to look like an idiot and you won't get a second term.
Yeah, I guess Milei's chainsaw is the equivalent to George H.W. Bush, read my lips. It's a little more genteel, but you better not do it.
Yeah,
There's a political price to pay.
You
if
are
you don't
committing
follow through
yourself. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So, again, as we always say, pop the popcorn. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch what's happening in Argentina. And so far, he seems to be following through on that promise. We'll see what the impact is. All right, Jim, the best political theater is always a lot more fun to talk about. Unfortunately, we also have to talk about the worst political theater of the year. So what do you choose for 2023?
Yeah, a lot of competitive proposals or ideas here. But I'm going to go with the President of the United States, whenever he goes off script, doesn't follow the teleprompter, and starts making off-the-cuff remarks. Look, the president is 81. It shows. It's clear in his voice. It's clear in his face. And it's clear in his meandering remarks and how often he can go off on tangents, and Corn Pop may or may make an appearance. One of my all-time favorite comedians, Dana Carvey, started doing impressions of Biden on, I think it was the Colbert Show. And it was really good because he kept he would begin a sentence and then kind of go into a different one. So it's really, like my dad used to say, it's the first thing, it's the thing. Come on, man. Just keep doing it. I can't do it as well as Carvey does, but you get the idea of the degree to which take a speech of Biden, cut it up into small pieces, scatter them all, and then order them in random. And that's kind of what you get when the president speaks. Listeners know, I think that the president is at 81 is too old. It's going to be worse next year as he approaches 82. If he's reelected, there's a reason that only about a third of Americans think he's going to finish his term. I think they think either he's going to, God forbid, die in office, or he's going to reach a point where he physically and mentally can't do the job anymore, and we will get President Kamala Harris. So, it saddens me, this choice. I don't want to say this, but the president is a shadow of his former self. He really can't communicate clearly. When he goes off script, he often creates headaches. And I also feel like that there's kind of this recurring sense of, the frequency of the White House staff comes out and says, well, the president didn't really mean to say that, or what the president meant to say was the exact opposite of what he said. We all kind of know that what Biden says doesn't really carry the full weight of the president of the United States anymore. So that's where we are. It's a sad state of affairs. I think I think Jill and Joe Biden should have contemplated this. I think people around the Biden should have contemplated this. And I think the Democrats should have realized that all you need to foresee this problem was a calendar. And that's, it's the most predictable problem any president has ever faced. Unfortunately, I guess the idea is to just, muddle on through and hope that Americans are fine with a president who's going deeper and deeper into his 80s.
I think you're the one who called him Walter Mitty, because in some of these moments, he's always the hero of the story, yep. Whether the story has any semblance of the truth whatsoever. I mean, according to Joe Biden, he spent his entire growing up years in black church, Catholic church, synagogue, and actually went there more than the people who were actually members there. He's been an all-state lacrosse player. He had a commission in the Naval Academy. All this stuff, it's embarrassing. And, what's he going to make up today when he answers questions about what you would do if China attacks Taiwan and then the administration has to back away from it time after time after time? That's a little bit bigger of a problem. And so when you can't even have confidence of sending the President of the United States out there without raising blood pressure behind the scenes past 200, that's a big issue. I always had this image in the early days of the administration of Ron Klain and Jen Psaki tucked away somewhere in the back room, just pounding the table going, got to clean that up, got to clean that up. It's just no matter.
Clean up on aisle 6.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right. All right. Well, my worst political theater takes us back to late March of this year and the state of Tennessee. It was in the wake of the horrific mass shooting at the Covenant Christian School, carried out by an alum of that school who was a female identifying as a male, left a manifesto, but we're not allowed to see that manifesto for some reason. Some of it got leaked out, and it was obvious that she was not very fond of white kids from wealthy families, so apparently they didn't deserve to live or something, but we're not allowed to see the full manifesto. But instead of focusing on the heinous actions that day, you had members of the Tennessee state legislature decide to put the focus on gun control, as usually happens in the wake of something like this. And so the protests came to the state capitol in Nashville. And instead of staying at a reasonable distance from the state legislature, you had members of the state legislature leading the protest onto the floor. Representatives Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria Johnson. And in the end, they ended up disrupting business on the floor. And as we, of course, have been told in recent years, Jim, disrupting the business of the legislature is a very, very serious thing. And so as a result of that absolutely undisciplined action, Representatives Jones and Pearson were expelled, although the Republicans probably should have done a little bit of homework before doing that when realizing they could immediately be reinstated into the legislature. Gloria Johnson fell just short of expulsion because she did not actually take the bullhorn and lead the protest on the floor, although she did stand with them while they were doing it. But then the martyrdom play here from these members. They played the race card. They played all sorts of different victimhoods as they're the ones that were wronged here because they happened to, raucously disrupt the business on the floor and actually had to pay a political consequence for it. Can't imagine. So that's my choice for worst political theater of the year.
Greg, that's an excellent choice. I think it's also a good indicator of something that can be like the center of the political universe and the biggest deal imaginable for one news cycle. Like within 3 weeks, everybody forgotten about it. Both the shooting and the protests on the floor and all that stuff. It's a Rush Limbaugh used to call it the drive-by media. And I think one of the reasons there are a lot of problems with the news media and the way our politics operates, but I kind of feel like this sense of something being huge and then utterly forgotten about or barely discussed in a 24-hour news cycle as some other big story comes along and does it. And there's no time for digestion. There's no time for reaction. There's no time for consequences of particular bad actions and things like that. And I think that's one of the reasons we live in such a shameless political era is that we're always moving on to the next thing without, finishing the appropriate consequences and digestion and discussion of what just passed.
Yeah, that's the consequence of instant news is you've got an avalanche or a fire hose of news and it's always the instinct to move on to what's new as opposed to digging into an obviously massive event and figuring out what happened there. And then in addition to the political ramifications and the political stunt playing out on the legislative floor. So, yeah, as you mentioned, a lot of drive-by coverage. And in a couple of days, we'll be talking about the underreported and overreported stories. So make sure you stay tuned for that on Thursday. Tomorrow, however, we're going to be talking about best idea, worst idea, and boldest tactic for 2023. So a lot of opportunities for discussion there as well. So, Jim, have a great day. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please do subscribe to our podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends to do it as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please, really do keep those coming. They really are a big help to us. Get us also on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Tuesday and join us again Wednesday for the next Three Martini Lunch.